Well, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor Rishi Sunak have backtracked on plans not to self-isolate after contact with the Health Secretary who tested positive for COVID. They had initially said they would be tested daily rather than self-isolating, prompting accusations of hypocrisy. It comes ahead of the lifting of almost all mandatory COVID restrictions in England tomorrow.
It's being billed as a new dawn. Tomorrow, almost all remaining COVID restrictions will be lifted in England, including social distancing and mask wearing. But what some call Freedom Day, others believe is shrouded in uncertainty, with some criticism that it is a step too far, as the Delta variant pushes COVID cases to their highest levels in months.
I think it's almost certain we'll get to 1,000 hospitalisations today per day. It'll almost certainly get to 100,000 cases a day. The real question is, do we get to double that or even higher? And that's where the crystal ball starts to fail.
Ahead of the rule changes, the British Prime Minister was forced into a rapid U-turn today. Notified as a close contact of Health Secretary Sajid Javid, who has been diagnosed with COVID, Mr Johnson and his Chancellor said they would take part in a pilot scheme of daily testing rather than self-isolate.
There will be parents watching the programme this morning who have had to struggle with their children sent home as part of the bubbling system, or there'll be businesses who have had to struggle because their staff have been pinged and they've had to isolate themselves, who will be waking up to this news thinking, my word, yet again, it's one rule for them and another for the rest of us.
Within hours, the decision was reversed.
We did look briefly at the idea of us taking part in the pilot scheme, which allows people to test daily, but I think it's far more important that everybody sticks to the same rules.
In spite of tomorrow's changes, many companies, including London's transport network, will insist on the continued use of face masks, amid concern that the sun has not yet set on the need for COVID restrictions. Fiona Mitchell, RTE News.
Let's speak to our London correspondent, Sean Whelan. He's at the South Bank in London for us this evening. Sean, are we looking at a PR disaster here for Downing Street before all of these restrictions are even lifted? And then if we go forward, is this a bit of a gamble with COVID they're taking this Freedom Day?
Yes to both things, Ray. Let's start with that PR disaster for a start. You've got a new health secretary has come in, Sajid Javid. He went down with COVID yesterday, and then the questions immediately started. Who were his close contacts? Turns out the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister. And as you heard in Fiona's report, at 8 o'clock this morning, Downing Street was saying, oh no, don't worry, they don't have to isolate. They're both going into a new experimental daily testing programme. Within 2.5 hours, they'd completely U-turned on that and said, yes, they will go into isolation, though in the case of Boris Johnson, it's isolation in a country mansion, Chequers, with plenty of servants to look after him. Nevertheless, it has been a real problem for the government. They've had a big misstep in their communications, and it does look like there's one rule for them and one rule for the rest of the country. Not that the rest of the country, as you can see behind me, seems to be terribly concerned about the COVID virus outbreaks, but a lot of other people are. Transport unions are predicting a lot of problems tomorrow on two counts. One is the number of staff who are being pinged for close contacts with people who have COVID, leading to them having to drop out of service. We've seen a couple of tube lines being affected by that over the weekend, possibly more tomorrow. They're also worried about irate customers berating, possibly even attacking staff over whether or not they have to wear masks. It is no longer compulsory in England to wear masks, but here in London it is going to be compulsory under local bylaws on the tube, on buses, in taxis as well. Uber have a no mask, no ride policy, and that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. And then that warning from epidemiologist Neil Ferguson, who's been pretty on the money in his predictions now, talking about the government's anticipated 100,000 daily cases of this coronavirus happening over the next coming weeks, but speculating openly as to whether or not that might double to 200,000 cases a day. Now remember, at 54,000 cases a day, Britain is already the third worst country in the whole world. Only Brazil and Indonesia are registering more daily cases right now. Going to 200,000, that will be a huge number, putting pressure on the hospital service. They reckon about 2,000 cases a day going into hospital at that rate. and because there's no lockdown, there's no mechanism for controlling it. It's just open season, let the virus burn out. At least that is what their hope is. That is what this big British, or English specifically, experiment is all about.
OK, Sean in London, thank you.